Welcome to the best time of the whole week, Saturday morning. The rush of the workaday world is in the past. Monday still hasn't reared its ugly head. And this is the one day you can just sit back and relax, if even for just a moment. And one of the ways I love to relax on Saturday morning is with a nice, hot, frothy cappuccino. Somehow, through divine providence, no doubt, you have stumbled into this little corner of the internet and have discovered this podcast, Saturday Cappuccino with the Saints. Because after all, who better to share a cup of coffee with than one of the uncountable number of saints from our tradition? Each week, we set aside a little bit of time to discuss the saint of the week, or two. Some weeks are packed, as well as explore any major festivals of the Christian tradition coming up or just celebrated. I've always been a history nerd, and church history, especially with the stories and lives of the saints, are a continual source of inspiration. I hope you enjoy this little respite from the normal grind. And now, sit back, pour yourself a nice frothy cappuccino or the drink of your choice. Don't worry, no one checks. And enjoy. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel if you want to continue to see our content. And remember to hit the notification bell to be alerted to new videos. And so now, on to this week's episode. This Saturday we will remember the amazing Saint Pope Gregory the Great, one of the few popes in history given the title of Great. He is quite an impressive man to study, and given that he was assigned the title of Great, it won't be surprising to learn why he is so remembered. It promises to be a very eye-opening morning. For the last several weeks, we've also been studying one of the many parables of Jesus, along with the saints. It is quite a long list of parables, and we will continue this journey for some time yet. We aren't even halfway finished. There have been many we have studied that may be new to some of us. Others we have discussed are very well known to everyone, true classics. But there is probably no parable better known or more beloved than the one we will discuss this week, the parable of the Prodigal Son. It seems to be everyone's favorite parable. All love the story of the forgiving father taking back his wayward prodigal son. Their reunion is one of the most heartwarming and touching scenes in the entire New Testament. But the parable is a story of two sons, not just one. It is a far more complex and deep lesson being taught by our Lord than many of us realize. This parable is so deep and so rich, it is going to take 2 weeks to explore. This week, we will focus on the younger son. Before we get into talking about St. Gregory the Great, though, I have to give a shout out to a website I go to all the time. It's Saints and Feasts of the Catholic Church. They have every single day. They have a little clip giving a little brief biographical description of the saint of the day. And they did a really good job on Pope Gregory the Great. So I thought starting off with their video kind of gives you a little background information before we get into more of the details. So get ready to learn about Saint Pope Gregory the Great.
Welcome to Saints and Feasts of the Catholic Calendar, meeting the greatest men and women who have ever lived. September 3rd, St. Gregory the Great, Pope and Doctor, 540 to 604, patron saint of musicians, singers, students, and teachers. A gifted nobleman serves Rome, becomes a monk, and then a consequential pope. When your salad is awesome, your car amazing, and your internet connection is great, there's a problem. Overused superlatives diminish their own meaning and crowd the linguistic space reserved for things which are truly awesome, amazing, and great. Today's saint sent the large missionary party that trekked across Europe and converted Saxon England to Catholicism, establishing a culture that endured for almost a millennium. That's awesome. He wrote a theological work that was used for centuries by thousands of bishops to help them become more fatherly pastors. That's amazing. Gregorian chant is named after him. He is one of the 4 Latin fathers of the Church. He was the first pope to use servant of the servants of God as a papal title. He alone preserved the memory of Saint Benedict with a biography. He made revisions to the content and structure of the Mass, which are part of the liturgy until today. And he was the most impactful pope of the long span of centuries from the 500s to the 1000s. That's great. These accomplishments thus truly merit the title Great, with which St. Gregory has been justly crowned by history. Pope St. Gregory the Great was born into a noble Roman family with a history of service to church and empire. The family home was perched on one of Rome's 7 ancient hills, the Caelian, which Via San Gregorio still cuts through today. His father was a Roman senator, although at a time when Italy was in decline, and the imperial government was based in Constantinople. Gregory received an education in keeping with his class and became the prefect of Rome, its highest civil position, in his early 30s. In 579, he was chosen by the Pope as his emissary to the emperor's court in Constantinople, primarily to seek the emperor's assistance in protecting Italy from the Lombard tribes that had long ago overrun her. Gregory was elected the bishop of his home city in 590 and was thus obligated to abandon the quiet life of a monk, which he had been living with some friends for a few years in a small monastery near his family home. In numerous letters which have fortunately been preserved, Pope Gregory, soon after his election, bemoans the loss of his monastic solitude, peaceful recollection, and life of prayer. But he had only been a monk for a few short years. Gregory's skills as an administrator, honed in his long years of prior civil and church leadership, proved valuable when he sat on the chair of St. Peter. He drew into the orbit of papal authority the bishops of France and Spain who had, until then, been operating somewhat autonomously. He secured the allegiance of Italy's northern tribes to Orthodox Catholicism, compelling them to abandon the counterfeit Arian Christianity they had held for centuries. And Gregory made the fateful decision to personally organize and promote the great and highly successful missionary journey of St. Augustine of Canterbury to the Kingdom of Kent in England. Pope St. Gregory the Great's legacy in liturgy, pastoral doctrine, and miracles left a deep mark on medieval Europe and beyond. The Council of Trent in 1562 mandated the suppression of votive mass cycles for the dead or for any other need, but the Council Fathers made one exception. The Mass of St. Gregory, a cycle of 30 masses on 30 consecutive days for the release of a soul from purgatory, was not suppressed. Almost 1,000 years after his death, Gregory's memory was too venerable to suppress. Gregory was an encourager of the encouragers, a bishop who modeled, strengthened, and explained how and why his fellow bishops should be fathers first and lords second. Pope St. Gregory the Great, your example of holy leadership, of scholarly practicality, of balance between universal and local concerns, helps all Christians to weigh their many duties in a proper balance and to choose correctly what matters most to God and their own salvation. Amen.
This is our second Doctor of the Church that we're going to study in a row. If you remember last week, we talked about St. Augustine, who was a Doctor of the Church. St. Gregory, who is the third from the left, is who we're going to talk about this week. The other two doctors that will come up, no doubt, is Saint Jerome, who is the one you see second from the left. He's got the lion at his feet. And Saint Ambrose, who we talked about a little briefly with Saint Augustine. We'll talk about him in more detail later. But Saint Gregory the Great, not only a great pope, but also great and also a doctor of the church. So he's the full package. Back in 2020, when I was locked down and wondering what was going on, as I'm sure you were as well, I remember seeing countless articles and posts on Facebook and social media, and I think even several magazines had the cover story, 2020, the worst year in history. And I remember there was a historian that they were interviewing. I can't remember his name, but they were asking him about this, and he just laughed. 2020 wouldn't even rank in the top 100 worst years. You want to talk about a bad year? The year about 4 years prior to Gregory the Great's birth was the worst year in human history. I don't even think there's a close second. And the reason I think this is important, I think the things that are happening around the time of your birth and around your childhood, these are forming events that affect you in ways you can't possibly even know. Anybody who grew up in the Depression, that affected the way they saw everything after that. People who grew up in the societal upheaval during the Civil War, their opinions on things were shaped by that event. Or in more modern times, people who grew up in the 60s and 70s, they have a different perspective than somebody who were born maybe in 1990 or 2000. Well, Gregory was born in the year 540, which was just a few years after the worst year in history. No question about it. The year 536. If you had a chance to live in the past, one year you wouldn't want to choose would be the year 536. Just to give you a couple of the things going on in the year 536. It was known as there were years where there was no summer. It was a perpetual fog. The sun was blotted out, and it snowed. I believe in Rome in August. And if anybody's been to Rome, especially if they've been to Rome in August, that's not something that's going to happen very often. The reason is there was a mammoth volcanic eruption that shrouded the entire Earth in essentially what was almost like a nuclear winter. This, lack of sunlight caused a massive crop failure across the world, leading to widespread starvation. When you have widespread starvation and massive crop failure, plague soon follows. And I think scientists have narrowed it down that maybe the first example of what would be known as the Black Death in the year 1349 came during this time. This was the first time that was brought on by this mammoth starvation. When you have all these things happening at the same time, Rome was already falling. I mean, people always say Rome fell in 476 in the West. Well, it was a process. It wasn't like 1 year there was Rome and the next year all society has collapsed. It didn't happen overnight. Rome was very fragile, but society was continuing to go on even under the barbarian kings. Well, this pushed them totally over the edge. When you talk about a Dark Ages, this was the Dark Ages. And the Dark Ages because half of the population died of starvation or plague in just a couple years. And whatever loose threads of society that were still being held together by the most tenuous connections completely collapsed at this point. Society completely collapsed. We will, in a few months, I'm sure, talk about Saint Benedict. Saint Benedict was alive at this time, and this is when he formed his monastic movement, kind of in response to essentially what seemed to him, and I'm sure most people at the time, that if this isn't the end of the world, that sure looks like what it would look like. There was economic collapse, mammoth inflation, civil wars, complete total breakdown. That was the world in which Gregory the Great was born into. And I think knowing that will give us a little insight into the way Gregory came about things, how he went, what his thinking was, and is another reason I think that led him to be the Great. You know I love maps. Well, here's another one. So I hope you like maps too, because trust me, there's a lot more maps coming. This is a map of the basically the Roman Empire, or what was left of the Roman Empire in Gregory's childhood. Everything that you see kind of in that dark pink was the Eastern Roman Empire, and the Eastern Roman Empire was doing pretty well. It was under the rule of Justinian at the time. Also Justinian the Great, and another one of the few Roman emperors that was given the title of the Great. Well, Justinian was just outraged by the fall of the West, the fact that the Vandals had taken over North Africa and the Ostrogoths had taken over Italy. I mean, and the Visigoths had taken over Spain. And these were the homelands of the Roman Empire, the ancient Roman Empire. And so over a period of a few years under Belisarius, his brilliant general that led his armies, he reconquered a lot of the old Roman Empire. He reconquered North Africa, that was part of the Vandal kingdom, and he also conquered most, if not all, of Italy and a little bit of Spain. So Justinian was trying to reformulate the old Roman Empire during this time. Now, it's not all roses here. I mean, this was all, they were already suffering under the effects of this perpetual winter and starvation and plague, and this endless series of wars of Justinian. Wars are never a good thing, and there's never a good time for them. But if you had to pick a time to not have one, this would have been the time. Italy, which prior to around, let's say, the mid-6th century, wasn't doing too bad, even though they had been conquered by the Ostrogoths. Well, this, on top of everything else that had happened, just turned Italy into just a complete, utter wasteland. I mean, to give you one perfect example, Rome, at the height of the Roman Empire, had a population of roughly 1 million people. By this time, there were less than 3,000 people living in the city of Rome. So it went from the most impressive, largest city in the ancient world to barely bigger than a village. Gregory was born into an incredibly wealthy and influential Roman family, even in these turbulent times. His father, Gordianus, had been prefect of Rome. His great-great-great-grandfather had been Pope Felix III. So his family had been in the elite of Roman society for generations. And so when Pope Gregory, before he was Pope and he just was starting his career, I mean, he had a typical education of somebody of his class as a senator's son, and entered into public service, working himself up to be prefect of the city. He entered the church service. He was always oriented towards doing the work for the Lord. Started a monastery on one of his family's estates, and eventually he came into the church and was ordained as a priest. And the Pope at the time appointed him to be ambassador to the Eastern court under Justinian. Even though Rome in Italy and North Africa had been conquered by the Eastern Roman Empire, they were still, it was very tenuous, and they didn't have direct Roman rule. So he operated as an ambassador from the Pope to the Byzantine emperor, Justinian. The terrible year of 536 continued to have reverberations throughout Pope Gregory's life. When he was probably 35, still a relatively young man, he came back to Rome from the court of Justinian, and was working in the upper echelons of the church. When the Pope Pelagius died of plague, there had been just like wave after wave of plague, and one of the worst to happen that we know from history as the plague of Justinian. Not that Justinian caused the plague, of course. This was all just an echo from the year 536. But this was a terrible plague, probably the worst of the bunch up until the Black Death. I mean, millions died, not just in Europe, but throughout the world. And one of the victims was Pope Pelagius. Well, Gregory was there when Pope Pelagius died, and he was acclaimed by everyone immediately. This guy needs to be the Pope. I will say, since he was universally acclaimed, they knew how to choose a good one back then, even in these dark times, because they chose wisely when they unanimously elected Gregory the Great. But being elected Pope, especially at this time, would be probably similar to being named the captain of the Titanic after you hit the iceberg. They weren't doing Gregory any favors. I mean, this was a terrible time for the church as well. I mean, these sort of upheavals were causing mammoth problems in the church. The church's finances were just complete disaster, wreck. I mean, people couldn't be paid. There was no money. I mean, it was a rough time. But Gregory, not only was he a brilliant theologian, but he was a brilliant church administrator, and he got things under control fairly quickly. We can forget sometimes that the civil administration of Rome, in fact, of society in large, was gone. I mean, there was no civil administration. And so the only organization left at this time was the church. And so Gregory, as Pope, also became the de facto administrator of the city of Rome. And so he not only had to deal with church matters, but he had to deal with civil matters as well. Are the roads getting fixed? What are we doing about the plague? Are people rioting? I mean, so this was a big job. And it was a job he did extremely well. Even if Gregory wasn't known for anything else, what he did for the church and his writings and sermons or whatnot, he would be remembered today just for righting this ship that was in the middle of a storm. I mean, he was probably the best administrator that the city of Rome had had since the time of Augustus. I mean, he was that good. Another thing that Gregory is tremendously remembered for today, especially in England, is that he is the one that sent the first missionaries to re-evangelize England. I mean, England had been Christian during Roman Britain, but when Rome fell and they had pulled out of the province of England relatively early, they couldn't afford to keep it up, and it had been conquered by the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes. They had completely reverted to paganism. Well, Gregory sent missionaries to England to evangelize them, and when some of those missionaries came back and sent captives to Rome from England, he asked who they were, and he said, "Oh, these are Angles." And he said, "Angels? Oh, they must be angels." And that has stuck with being associated with Gregory, that he was so moved by the status of England and that the need for them to be re-evangelized, that he referred to the angles as angels. I think that's a charming story to remember Gregory by. During the prior couple centuries, when society really was undergoing such mammoth, terrible changes, the church had just turned into just a mess, and the liturgy was all over the place. The liturgy that you might see in Spain might be different than you might see in France, that you might see in Italy, and it was just a hodgepodge. A lot of the priests weren't necessarily as well educated as they should be, and Gregory was very responsible for getting things in hand. I mean, he really updated the liturgy. He kind of set the pattern that kind of still the bones of it exist today. So much of the liturgy that you see in church today came from Gregory's reforms back in the 6th century. Despite being, I'm sure, very busy, uh, holding down the collapse of civilization, staving off the barbarian hordes, dealing with plague. As civil administrator, I mean, he essentially also created an almsgiving system to where the poor and the sick and the needy in Rome could be helped, something that had never really happened on any kind of organized scale before. Despite all that, which seems like a pretty full plate, Gregory is also remembered today as being a prodigious writer. I mean, he wrote sermons and treatises and papal proclamations. Yeah, I mean, you could fill a library with everything that Gregory wrote. So I mean, he was a world-class genius, and many of his sermons are still printed today and are well remembered. He did make one big error, though, that we are still dealing with today. And it deals with Mary Magdalene, who we will no doubt talk about in the future. She's a major saint and a personal favorite of mine. But I don't know whether maybe he was tired. I'm going to cut Pope Gregory the Great a little slack here. He did have a full calendar, but I think he decided just to make a point, some point in a sermon, to combine the women, the woman that was in sin at Jesus' feet, that was wiping his feet with her hair, the woman caught in adultery, and some other women of ill repute with Mary Magdalene. He kind of combined all these people, all these Marys, into one character for a sermon that he gave on Easter. I understand why he did it. I mean, I will say sometimes the Bible itself could be very confusing since so many people have the same name. I mean, the famous passage from the Bible, Mary Magdalene, Mary, and the other Mary all went to the tomb. So it's like a lot of Marys in the Bible. But when he did that, he inadvertently created a black mark on Mary Magdalene that kind of exists today. I mean, if you saw the movie, I mean, or the play Jesus Christ Superstar, Mary Magdalene is a reformed prostitute. Even in Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, which in all other aspects is just an excellent movie, he still plays into this idea that Mary Magdalene was a woman of ill repute that was saved by Jesus. I'm not saying that women of ill repute can't be saved by Jesus, but I think it's unfair to lay this on Mary Magdalene when the evidence actually points in another direction. So if I had to have one slight ding on Pope Gregory's otherwise stellar track record, it would be this one. For any of you listeners under the age of 30, or if any of you listeners have children or friends under the age of 30, and you told them this fact, that back in 1994, one of the best-selling albums of the year was an album by the Benedictine monks of Santo Domingo de Salos, had one of the number one selling albums of that year just with Gregorian chant, they might think that you had hit your head or something. I mean, it seems incredible today that was the case. But it was the case, and I know from personal experience because I bought the album. I bought it as a vinyl because that's what you had back then, and then I bought it as a CD, and then I bought it as on Napster. Now I have it on streaming. So like anybody of a certain age, and I'm one of those people, you end up buying the same albums over and over and over, just in different formats as they come out. I'm a big fan of this album, and the reason I'm bringing this up is that Gregorian chant came from, he not only is Pope Gregory the Great known for all these fantastic things he did with the liturgy and theology and administration, he also brought us Gregorian chant that has had such an impact on music in church for centuries, and thereby it's named for him. So if you ever get a chance, you should go on YouTube and just type in Gregorian chant. It is a really very relaxing thing to listen to. It'll immediately transport you into just another world. And part of me thinks that must be what heaven sounds like. This is how you know Pope Gregory the First is great. Even John Calvin, no fan of popes by any stretch of the imagination, even he liked Gregory the Great. Now he said he was the last good pope, so that shows you where he's coming from. But I mean, everybody, Protestants, Catholics, Calvinists, Eastern Orthodox, everybody loves Pope Gregory the Great, and there's a reason. He is one of those few individuals that come around that is just of the right man for the right time, and of just unbelievable qualities. So I think he has earned his title, the Great, honestly. So we're going to end our discussion of St. Pope Gregory the Great with a prayer for the feast day of St. Pope Gregory the Great. Almighty and merciful God, you raised up Gregory of Rome to be a servant of the servants of God, and inspired him to send missionaries to preach the gospel to the English people. Preserve in your church the Catholic and Apostolic faith that they taught, that your people, being fruitful in every good work, may receive the crown of glory that never fades away. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Our parable this week is the parable of the Prodigal Son. It is one of the most beloved of all the parables, and it's a story that all of us know. And he said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his field to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he rose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring quickly the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet. And bring the fattened calf, and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead, and he is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called to one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to them, "Your brother has come back, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound." But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, "Look, these many years I have served you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat, that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him." And he said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." We're in for a real treat this week. When I was looking around for a commentary on this parable that I could use for this video, I found a commentary done by Tim Keller, who I highly admire. He passed away too soon. Tim Keller and his books and sermons have been a great comfort to me over the years. And you should just always look him up on YouTube. He was a very insightful and godly man, and I highly admired Tim Keller, and he really could dig into text and pull things out of it that not your average person could. A few years ago, he wrote this excellent book that I highly recommend called The Prodigal God. The whole book was about this parable, and this is one of the reasons that I'm breaking it up into two parts, because there's a lot going on in this parable. It's not a straightforward story. So, he's going to be the one that is going to do the commentary this week for this week's parable. So get ready. It's a real treat. The thing to remember about this parable is that this is a parable of two brothers. Everybody usually focuses on the younger brother, which we are focusing on this week. But it's really a parable about the two brothers. And the real message of the story might be more about the older brother than the younger brother, which is the younger brother's story is a little bit more straightforward and we can understand it. But this is a really well done commentary about this parable. So it's a real treat. So we're going to break this up into two parts. This week we're going to concentrate on the younger brother, and it's a pretty straightforward story. Everybody loves this story. The younger brother that goes off and sins and wastes his father's money, and then runs home to the loving embrace of his forgiving father. That's a parable that it warms the hearts of everyone, and it is one of the most touching scenes of the Bible. But get ready. Tim Keller has a lot of very interesting things to pull out of this parable that may not have crossed your mind the first time or even the 10th time you read it.
There's a famous story in the book of Luke that for centuries has been known as the parable of the prodigal son. It's a story about a son who takes his father's inheritance, wastes it all, and then returns to a forgiving father. But it is a great mistake to think that this is a story about just one son. It's actually a tale of two sons. It's a story about a younger brother and an elder brother. We are meant to compare and contrast them. And if we don't compare and contrast them, we miss the radical message that Jesus is leading us to. This parable undermines the existing paradigms, the existing categories we have for understanding our relationship with God. And there's something else very interesting about this story. For a long time, there has been a simple formula, a simple three-act formula for telling a story. As you build the story, you first begin with background information and setup. Then you introduce the problem or the conflict, and finally there's the resolution. But Jesus doesn't follow the rules here. Why? The clues come right at the beginning of the first act. The first act begins with a speech. The younger son comes to the father and says, "Father, give me my share of the estate." Now, the original listeners to this story would have been amazed at such a request. If you were a father and you had two sons and you died, your estate would have been divided 2/3 to the older son, 1/3 to the younger son, because the oldest son in those days always got a double portion of what every other child got. But this only happened when the father died. So when the younger son comes and says, "Give me my share of the estate now," while the father's still alive, it's basically to wish the father dead. The younger son wants the father's things, but not the father. He wants the father's wealth and estate. He wants the comfort and the prestige and the independence that goes with those things. But he doesn't want the father. He wishes the father was dead. That's unheard of. But even more unheard of was the father's response to the request. If the original listeners were amazed at the son's speech, they would have been even more amazed at how the father responded to what the younger brother said. An ancient Middle Eastern father would have been expected to have driven the boy out of the house with verbal, if not violent, physical blows. But this father does not do that. What does the story say? It says, he divided the property between them. The Greek word used here for property is the word bios. It means the course of life, or that which by life is sustained. So the story really says the father divided his life between them. Why does it say that? The father's estate was his land. The father's wealth was his land. So the only way he could give his younger son 1/3 of his estate was to sell that land. In those days, people's very identity was bound up with their land. If you lost your land, you lost yourself. If you lost part of your land, you lost your status in the community, which was tied up to how much property you had. So what the younger son is asking the father to do is this. He's asking him to tear his life apart, to tear his standing in the community apart, to tear himself apart. And the father does. He divided his property between them, leaving him with 2/3 of the estate. So the son takes his share and goes off and squanders everything that he's been given. And he comes to the point where he's impoverished, where he's been taken advantage of, and his life is in absolute ruins. And when he's literally in the pigsty, when he's literally down in the mud, he comes to realize what a fool he's been, and he comes up with a plan. The first part of that plan is to go home. He says, "In my father's house there's bread to spare, and I'm starving here. I will go and confess to my father. He'll go home." Now this is simple, and yet it's very profound. Home is not primarily a place. It's a relationship. It's where you belong. It's where you are accepted. And he longs to come home. But there's a second part to this plan. He says, "I will go to the father And I will say, Father, I am not worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. This is not a request to become a slave. Slaves worked on the estate. Slaves lived on the estate. A hired man lived in town and had a wage. What he's actually saying, therefore, is that he wants to pay the father back. He knows that you did not come back into a community whose morals you have violated just through an apology. You had to make restitution. So he's coming to his father and he's saying, Father, I don't want to be reinstated as a son. I don't want the status of sonship. I don't deserve it. I'm not worthy of it. I want to earn my way back. Make me like one of your hired men. I want to pay you back. That's the plan. So he heads off home. And the father sees him coming from afar off. Now, if you are a father and you see your adult son coming, and this is a son who has harmed your family and has squandered a lot of your wealth, you see him through your window as you're sitting at your kitchen table, what are you going to do? You'll be sitting there and you will just tap your feet and you'll say, this better be good. Maybe if he's abject enough, maybe if he grovels enough, I might find that my affection is rekindled. This better be good. But what's the story say? This father, when he saw him coming from afar off, and he had compassion on him. And the father runs toward him. Now, ancient Middle Eastern patriarchs did not run. Children ran, youth ran, women might run, but not fathers, not owners of the estate. That would mean picking up your skirts and baring your legs, and you just didn't do that. But this father does. He shows complete emotional abandon. He runs to his son. He kisses him. And the Greek says he fell on his neck. Now the son tries to roll out his restitution plan, but the father will have nothing of it. He says to his servants, come, put a robe on him, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Now the ring is significant. It was a signet ring. It had the family seal on it. Back in those days, you didn't make a contract by signing something. You put the family seal from the signet ring on the contract. What is happening then is this. The son has said, I don't want to be brought back into the family. I want to earn my way back. But the father is saying now, I'm not going to let you earn your way back. I'm going to bring you back. And so he confers sonship on him like that in a stroke. By sheer grace, he grants it. And he throws a magnificent feast to commemorate the day that his lost son has come home. Some people are like the younger brother. They want the things that God provides, but they don't want God. They want their independence. They want to live their lives the way they want to live them, and they believe it will bring them happiness. And some of them, like the younger son, one day decide to go home. And because the father in the parable represents God, we are being told nothing less than this. No matter who you are, no matter how awful the stuff that you've done, if you come home, God will accept you, He will love you, and it's all by sheer grace. All of us are like the younger son, because when we first come to God, we say, I'm not worthy, I want to earn my way back, I want to try hard to pull it all together, and the biblical God will have none of it. He gives us the full rights as sons. He confers sonship on us through Jesus Christ. It's a standing, it's a status, it's secure. We're accepted.
Before we close out this week, I just want to pause and remark on what a gift Tim Keller had for preaching. I mean, we really lost a giant when we lost him. But we can still go back and listen to a lot of what he preached. I mean, a lot of his sermons are on YouTube. I believe he has a podcast that still uploads sermons that he had called Gospel in Life. And I highly recommend you check him out. I mean, I just know from my own personal experience. Tim Keller and the words of Tim Keller and his preaching has gotten me through quite a few dark times in my life. He really speaks to me, and this parable it speaks to me as well. One thing I just remark on this is that I think one other lesson I think you can learn from the younger son, and it's true for a lot of people. Sometimes people don't come to their senses until they're all the way in the pigsty. And they may at the time think it's a curse, but sometimes getting stuck in that pigsty to where you finally come to your senses and get your head right is the best thing that can happen to you. Anybody who's known anyone who's gone through AA, it's not an uncommon thing for people to say that the best thing that happened to them in their life was when they came to the absolute end of themselves. And it was only then that they realized that they can't do it themselves. They have to give it up to God. And sometimes it takes going all the way down to the very bottom before you can come to your senses. And I think that's one lesson out of this parable. So it's a lot to think about. Next week's even going to be more to think about. But we're going to end on this. This is I found this great prayer for the lost son's return. I know there's a lot of parents out there that have their own prodigal sons and daughters, and they worry about them and they pray for them. And this is a prayer for them, praying about their children, then for them to come home. Our Father, we lift up all prodigal sons to you. Embrace them in your infinite love, guiding their hearts back home. Heal their wounds and grant them the strength to seek forgiveness and redemption. May they find peace in your presence and return to the joy of your grace. Amen. This parable isn't over. There's a part 2 coming next week where we talk about it. We focus our thoughts on the older brother. And I think you'll be really surprised at what Tim Keller has to say. This is one's going to cut to the bone on a lot of us. It did on me. So look forward to that for next week. So something to think about to this week coming up, and I'll see you next Saturday. Thank you for spending your Saturday morning with us. Next week, we'll be exploring yet another hero from our Christian past. So be sure to tune in. Until then, keep your faith warm, your cappuccino hot and frothy, and have a great week. See you next week for another Saturday Cappuccino with the Saints.